My name is Elara, and this is not a story you were meant to hear. It was meant to be buried under the soil of Virginia, forgotten like the countless names and faces that tilled that same red earth before me. But a story, like a seed, can lie dormant for 100 years and still find the strength to break through the ground. The dogs. That's the sound I remember most clearly from the night it all began. Not the crickets, not the whisper of the wind through the tobacco leaves, but the baying of the hounds. It's a sound that crawls under your skin and makes a home in your bones. A sound that promises chains and leather and pain. That night, they weren't for me. Not yet. But as I lay on my thin straw pallet, heart hammering against my ribs, I heard them getting closer to another soul running for their life, and I made a promise to the darkness. One day, that would be me. But I would not be caught. My escape would be different. It would have to be an impossible escape. My world, for the first 16 years of my life, was the Oakwood Plantation. It was a sprawling kingdom of green tobacco and white cotton, ruled by a man we called Master Caldwell. His world was the grand White House on the hill, with its towering columns and glass windows that shimmered like ice. My world was the cabin, a single room of wood and mud shared with my mother, Mama Rose, and 2 other families. Our windows were empty squares, letting in the biting cold of winter and the suffocating heat of summer. Mama Rose was a healer. She carried the old knowledge from her grandmother, who had carried it across the ocean in the belly of a ship. She knew which roots could soothe a fever, which leaves could ease a cough, and which poultices could draw the poison from a snakebite. "The earth provides, Elara," she would whisper, her hands covered in dirt as she tended her small hidden garden behind our cabin. "You just have to know how to listen to it." She taught me to see the world not just as a place of suffering, but as a map of secrets. The moss on the north side of a tree, the pattern of the stars, the way a river bends. These were the things the masters didn't own. My childhood was a strange mix of terror and grace. I remember the feel of my mother's hand, braiding my hair, her fingers strong and sure. I remember the secret songs we sang in the fields, the ones that sounded like hymns of sorrow to the overseer, but were really maps and messages. "Follow the drinking gourd," we'd hum, our eyes glancing north, a silent promise shared between us. We preserved ourselves in these small ways. We were not just bodies to be worked to death. We were a people with a history written in scars and sung in whispers. The first crack in my world came when I was 10. It was an auction day. Master Caldwell had debts, and the price was to be paid in human flesh. A family from the neighboring cabin, the Jacksons, were put on the block. I watched as Sarah, a girl my age, was ripped from her mother's arms. The sound of that mother's scream, it wasn't human. It was the sound of a soul being torn in two. I saw Master Caldwell watch, his face impassive, as if he were merely selling livestock. He counted his money while a family was destroyed forever. That night I couldn't sleep. The mother's wails echoed from the empty Jackson cabin. I looked at my own mother, sleeping fitfully, and a cold dread washed over me. This could be us, any day, any time. The promise of family was a lie. The only thing we truly owned was the breath in our lungs, and even that was on loan. It was then that I understood the true nature of our bondage. It wasn't just the labor. It was the complete and total erasure of our humanity. We were property. Our children were not our own. They were potential assets, future workers, or, in the darkest whispers, the secret baby of a master's lust, destined to be sold away. The idea that any of us could give birth to a child who would be anything other than a slave, let alone some kind of symbolic millionaire of their own destiny, was a fantasy, a bitter, impossible dream. That night, pressed against my mother's back, I felt a shift inside me. The fear was still there, a cold, hard knot in my stomach, but something new grew around it. Rage. A quiet, burning rage that settled deep in my heart. The dogs had howled for someone else that night, but in my soul, I had started running. I looked out the empty window frame at the North Star, the one Mama Rose called the drinking gourd star, and I saw not just a point of light, but a destination. My mother taught me how to read the earth. Now I knew I had to learn to read the world, to understand the Master's language, his laws, his weaknesses. I would turn their tools against them. I would make my impossible dream a reality. I would not just survive in this world, I would find a way to escape it. The rage I felt after the auction became my secret fuel. But rage alone is a fire that consumes you. It needed a purpose, a direction. That direction came in the form of an old man named Samuel. Samuel worked in the stables. He was old, his back bent like a question mark from a lifetime of labor, but his eyes were as sharp as a hawk's. He had a secret that was more dangerous than any weapon on the plantation. He could read. He had learned as a boy, a house slave to a master who had a peculiar fondness for reading the Bible aloud. Samuel had listened, and he had learned. He saw the fire in my eyes. One evening, as I was gathering herbs near the stables, he called me over. His voice was a low rumble. "That anger you carry, girl. It'll get you whipped, or it'll get you free. Depends on how you use it." He showed me his treasure, a battered, coverless Bible hidden beneath a loose floorboard in the tack room. "The Master thinks these words are for him alone," he whispered, his finger tracing the letters. "He thinks they justify his power. But in these pages, there are stories of bondage, of plagues, of exodus, stories of a people led to a promised land." And so began my clandestine education. Every night I could steal away under the sliver of moonlight that cut through the stable's dusty air. Samuel taught me. My first letters were the names of prophets, Moses. My first sentences were verses of hope and deliverance. Learning to read felt like opening a door to a room I never knew existed. The marks on the page, once meaningless squiggles, transformed into voices, ideas, and maps. For the first time, I understood the true meaning of the songs we sang. Wade in the water wasn't just about baptism. It was an instruction to travel in the river, to throw the dogs off your scent. Steal away to Jesus wasn't just a call to prayer. It was a signal for a secret meeting. And Follow the Drinking Gourd was a literal map pointing the way north along the Tombigbee River, to the Ohio River, to freedom. The Underground Railroad, a name I had only heard in hushed, terrified whispers, was real. It was a network of brave souls, black and white, who risked everything to guide people out of bondage. My impossible escape suddenly had a name and a path. My resistance began to change. It was no longer just a simmering anger. It became strategic. I used the knowledge my mother gave me with a new, sharper purpose. When an overseer was particularly cruel, a special blend of herbs in his water would leave him with stomach cramps for days. When one of our own was sick from exhaustion, I knew what roots would restore their strength faster. I became a different kind of healer, tending not just to the body, but to the spirit of resistance. I was slow when I could be, misunderstanding orders, accidentally breaking a tool. Each small act was a tiny chip in the Master's authority, a reclamation of my own will. I started building alliances. I identified those who, like me, had that fire in their eyes. A field hand named Isaac, strong and silent, who could run like the wind. An older woman in the kitchen, Aunt Hattie, who heard all the gossip from the big house. We communicated with nods, with glances, with the slight change in the melody of a song. We were weaving a web of trust in a world built on fear and betrayal. Master Caldwell, in his arrogance, saw none of this. He saw a quiet, obedient girl, good with herbs, who never caused trouble. He did not see the woman I was becoming. He did not see the mind that was memorizing maps from scraps of newspaper found in the trash. A mind that was calculating the movements of the patrols. A mind that was planning. The thought of a child, a secret baby, was ever present. But now, It was not just a source of fear, but a motivator. What if I could have a child who would never know the feel of a lash? Who would learn to read not in secret but in a school? A child who could own their own life, their own future. That was a legacy worth more than all the gold in the world. A true heir millionaire of freedom. That thought transformed my quest. It was no longer just about my own liberty. It was about creating a future. My special skill, the one I honed in the shadows, was observation. I learned to be invisible. I learned to listen. I could tell by the sound of Master Caldwell's boots on the porch what kind of mood he was in. I knew which slave patrol captain was a drunk and which was ruthlessly efficient. I learned the schedules of the traders, the blacksmiths, the visitors who came and went. Oakwood Plantation became a chessboard, and I was learning the moves of every piece. Samuel gave me words, my mother gave me the earth, and my own anger gave me focus. The pieces were slowly coming together. The plan was no longer a dream. It was taking shape, a dangerous, fragile, beautiful thing. And I knew with a certainty that both thrilled and terrified me that soon I would have to make my move. The plan became my obsession. It lived in my head, a secret world I retreated to while my hands picked tobacco or stirred a pot. Every piece of information I gathered was a stone in the foundation of my escape. Then the world shifted. My quiet, calculated planning was shattered by a brutal reality. Master Caldwell began to notice me, not as a worker, not as a healer, but as a young woman. His gaze started to linger. His requests for me to bring herbs to the big house became more frequent, and at later hours, my mother saw it, her eyes filled with a familiar, helpless terror. Be careful, Elara. Be a ghost. Be nothing. But you cannot be nothing when the master of the world decides you are something. One night he cornered me in the pantry of the big house. There was no romance. There was no forbidden affair. There was only the cold, suffocating weight of his power and my powerlessness. It was a theft, another piece of me taken without my consent. Weeks later, the sickness in the morning confirmed my deepest fear. I was pregnant. And Niskrava was now carrying the child of the fazendero. My body had become a vessel for my own oppression. The news was a death sentence and a catalyst, all at once. The rage I had nurtured for years now had a singular, desperate focus. This child would not be born a slave. This child would not be the master's property, another number in his ledger. This was my child, and I would be damned if their first breath wasn't free air. The impossible escape was no longer a choice. It was a necessity. The timeline had accelerated. I had months, not years. My strategic planning intensified, now laced with a frantic urgency. The maps I had pieced together in my mind became concrete. From scraps of conversations overheard by Aunt Hattie, I knew a Quaker man, a carpenter named Mr. Elias Thorne, sometimes left supplies near the old Shiloh Creek, 5 miles north of the plantation. He was rumored to be a conductor. He was my first destination. From there, the route was a treacherous thread spun from spirituals and whispered stories. Follow the creek north until it meets the James River. There, look for free black boatmen who might carry fugitives hidden under cargo. Then, overland, through forests and swamps, always moving at night, always following the North Star. The goal was Philadelphia, a city I could barely imagine, a place where people said Harriet Tubman, the Moses of her people, brought her passengers to freedom. My allies became my lifeline. I confided in Samuel first. His old eyes filled with a grim understanding. "This changes everything," he rasped, "but it changes nothing. The goal is the same. Now, the reason is in your belly." He pledged to create a diversion on the night of my escape. Isaac, the swift runner, agreed to scout the patrol routes the week before, marking safe paths with discreet symbols carved into trees. Aunt Hattie would secure provisions, salted pork, hard biscuits, and a small water gourd, hiding them for me over days so they wouldn't be missed. The development of my skills was put to the ultimate test. My knowledge of herbs was now for survival. I prepared a pouch with dried yarrow to stop bleeding, willow bark for pain and fever, and a mixture of pungent roots that, when smeared on the soles of my feet, could help mask my scent from the dogs. I studied the patterns of the moon, the weather, the behavior of the animals. The hoot of an owl could be a signal from a friend, or it could be just an owl. The snap of a twig could be a deer, or it could be a slave catcher. My senses had to be sharper than ever before. The greatest torment was the dilemma of my mother. How could I leave her? The thought was a physical pain, a tearing in my chest. One night I broke down and told her everything: the attack, the pregnancy, the plan. She held me, her body trembling with a silent, racking grief. I expected her to beg me to stay, to be safe. Instead, she gripped my shoulders, her eyes fierce. "You must go," she said, her voice a steel whip. "You carry the future now, not just your own, but a part of me, a part of all of us who couldn't." She placed a small leather pouch in my hand. "Your grandmother brought this from Africa. It's for protection. Now you listen to me. When you are free, you live. You live for all of us. You don't look back." Her blessing was both a release and a terrible burden. I was to be the vessel of her hopes, the embodiment of a freedom she would never know. The life inside me, this secret baby, was no longer just my child. It was the inheritor of generations of suffering and resilience. This child, my child, would be my ultimate act of resistance. By stealing him away, I would humiliate the master in the deepest way possible. I would steal his property, his legacy, his bloodline. This child would not be a slave. This child would be free, the true heir millionaire of a future Caldwell could never own or imagine. The plan was set. The stakes could not be higher. With the new moon came the first attempt. It was a dress rehearsal, a test of the first leg of the journey. The plan was for Isaac to run a decoy route to the east, drawing the attention of the night patrol, while I slipped north towards Shiloh Creek. It was a simple plan, and it failed spectacularly. A sudden, unseasonal thunderstorm rolled in, turning the fields into a muddy quagmire. The creek, my first landmark, swelled into a raging torrent, impassable. Worse, the dogs, usually kept in their pens, were let loose by a spooked overseer, their baying echoing through the rain-soaked night. I was forced to retreat, scrambling back to my cabin, my clothes torn, my body covered in mud and scratches, my heart a cold stone of failure. I made it back just before dawn, my absence unnoticed, but the taste of defeat was bitter in my mouth. The impossible escape felt more impossible than ever. The consequence was not a whipping, but something more insidious. The failed attempt spooked me. For a week I was paralyzed by fear. Every shadow held a slave catcher. Every distant shout was a discovery. The baby inside me felt like a ticking clock, its presence a constant reminder of my dwindling time. The master's eyes were on me more, a smug, possessive look that made my skin crawl. He believed I was settling into my fate, his property, carrying his child. This quiet, psychological torment was its own kind of punishment. It was Mama Rose who pulled me from the despair. She saw the light dimming in my eyes. One evening she brought me a bowl of hot broth, thick with restorative herbs. "You did not fail," she whispered fiercely. You learned the creek can flood. You learned they loose the dogs in a storm. The first attempt is never the one that succeeds. This is not a single race, Elara. It is a war. You lost a battle, not the war. Her words and the unwavering support of my small circle of allies rekindled my determination. Isaac reported that his decoy had worked perfectly. The patrol had spent half the night chasing him through the eastern woods. Aunt Hattie had managed to replace the provisions I'd taken and lost. Samuel reminded me of the story of Moses, who faced the Pharaoh's army time and time again. Freedom is not given, he said, his voice a low growl. It is taken inch by bloody inch. My resolve hardened into something new. It was no longer just fierce, it was cold and calculating. I began to plan for the second attempt, this time incorporating the lessons from my failure. I would not rely on a single route. I created contingencies. If the creek was flooded, there was an old logging trail through the high woods. If the patrols were thick to the north, I had a secondary route west, longer but less watched. The new obstacle was Master Caldwell himself. He was preparing for a trip to Richmond to sell a portion of his tobacco harvest. This was both a danger and an opportunity. His absence would mean less vigilance from the big house, but it also meant the plantation would be left in the hands of his brutal overseer, a man named Finch, who enjoyed his authority. Finch was unpredictable. My community of fellow enslaved people who knew nothing of my grand plan became my unwitting shield. They saw the increased attention from Finch, the way he watched me. In small ways, they protected me. A dropped tool would create a distraction when he got too close. A misheard order would send him to the wrong field. They did this because I was one of them, because I was a healer, because they saw my growing belly and the unspoken terror in my eyes. They did it because protecting each other was the most fundamental form of resistance we had. This silent, communal support was a powerful reminder that I was not alone. The plan for the second attempt, scheduled for the night of the Master's departure, was more complex, more dangerous, but also more robust. I would not just be running from the plantation, I would be navigating a web of potential disasters. But this time, fear was not my companion. It was my tool. I knew its taste, its weight. I could use it. The stakes were absolute. The life of my secret baby depended on it. I would not fail again. This time, I would not just be trying to escape. I would be on my way to humiliate the man who thought he owned me by stealing the one thing he believed was his by right, his own child, his supposed millionaire. The week before Master Caldwell's departure was a blur of silent, frantic preparation. The air in the slave quarters was thick with an unspoken tension. My network of allies worked in the shadows, their every action a thread in the tapestry of my escape. Aunt Hattie slipped me a small, sharp knife, for protection, her eyes saying it was for more than just wild animals. Isaac confirmed the patrol routes were shifting to the south, anticipating runaways trying to follow the harvest wagons. This left the northern route, my route, clearer than it had been in months. The most critical link was forged with the outside world. Following Samuel's cryptic instructions, I left a bundle of specific herbs, a healer's signal, by a hollow log near Shiloh Creek. The next day, it was gone. In its place was a small piece of charcoal and a slate. It was a test from the Quaker conductor, Elias Thorne. A message was scratched onto the slate. "What star guides the lost?" My hand trembled as I wrote the reply I had learned from Samuel and the songs, the one that points to the drinking gourd. The following night, the slate held a new message. "New moon, 2 days after the master leaves. Be by the great oak at the edge of the swamp. A friend will be waiting." The network was real. The Quakers, the free blacks, the abolitionists I had only dared to dream of. They were out there, they were waiting. My impossible escape and felt, for the first time, truly possible. But in a world built on bondage, trust is a fragile currency. And where there is great hope, there is often great betrayal. There was a man named Joseph. He worked in the fields with me. He was quiet, his eyes always downcast, but he saw everything. I had misjudged his silence for sullenness, but it was the silence of a broken spirit. Years ago, his wife had tried to escape. She was caught, and in front of everyone, she was sold south to the sugar plantations of Louisiana, a fate considered worse than death. Joseph had never been the same. He saw the provisions Aunt Hattie gave me. He saw the way I looked at the northern sky. He saw the hope in my eyes, and he couldn't bear it. It was a mirror to his own lost hope. One afternoon, he approached the overseer, Finch. I didn't hear what was said, But I saw the coin Finch pressed into Joseph's hand. I saw the look on Joseph's face, not of triumph, but of utter self-loathing. My blood ran cold. He had betrayed me. The test of my alliances came immediately. Finch, believing he had a simple runaway on his hands, grew confident, sloppy. He boasted in the stables about how he was going to catch me red-handed, that he knew I was planning to run soon. Samuel overheard him. Within the hour, the news flew through our secret network on wings of whispered panic. Samuel's response was swift and brilliant. He went to Finch himself. "Master Finch," he said, his voice full of feigned worry, "I hear talk. That girl Elara, she's not right in the head since she got with child, talking about running off to the swamp to live with the spirits." He fed Finch a false trail. A story about a dugout canoe hidden on the western edge of the swamp, a place of thick mud and snakes. He made my plans sound like the ravings of a hysterical pregnant girl. Finch, arrogant and cruel, bought it completely. He saw an easy capture, a chance to look good for Master Caldwell upon his return. He diverted his patrols to the west, planning to lie in wait for me there. Joseph's betrayal, meant to destroy me, had instead been twisted by Samuel's quick thinking into the perfect diversion. My real route to the north was now wide open. The final night on the plantation was surreal. Master Caldwell was gone. The air was cool and crisp. I went to my mother's side one last time. We didn't speak. There were no more words to be said. She simply held my hand, her palm rough against mine. She pressed a small, hard biscuit into my hand. "For the road," was all she said. It was a goodbye, a blessing, a prayer. Leaving her was the hardest thing I had ever done. A piece of my soul left behind in that small, dark cabin. As I slipped out into the darkness, I carried the weight of it all. My mother's sacrifice, Samuel's cunning, Isaac's bravery, Aunt Hattie's quiet care, and even Joseph's brokenness. He hadn't betrayed me out of malice, but out of pain. The system of slavery had not just broken his family, it had broken his soul. My escape was no longer just for me and my secret baby. It was for them too. It was a strike against the system that turned men like Joseph into traitors and men like Caldwell into monsters. I would not let them win. I would take this child, this symbolic heir millionaire of a new world, and humiliate the institution that sought to own us all. The night was a black velvet curtain, punctured only by a sliver of moon. The air was electric. As I moved through the familiar fields for the last time, every sound was magnified. The rustle of a field mouse, the sigh of the wind. I was a ghost, a shadow moving between other shadows. The first part of the plan went exactly as Samuel had designed. From the distance, far to the west, I heard a faint commotion, a single shout, then another. Finch and his patrols were taking Samuel's bait, crashing through the swamp, looking for a canoe that didn't exist. The diversion had worked. My path to the north was clear. My feet, smeared with the pungent herbs from my pouch, moved swiftly and silently over the damp earth. I was no longer a field hand. I was a hunter, a creature of the night. The skills my mother taught me, the observations I had so meticulously gathered, were now my only weapons. I moved with the landscape, not against it, my body remembering the dips and rises of the land, the places where the ground was soft and where it was firm. I reached the great oak at the edge of the swamp, my heart hammering against my ribs. Was the message real, or was this a trap? I waited, hidden in a thicket of reeds, my hand on the knife Aunt Hattie had given me. Minutes stretched into an eternity. Then, a low, soft whistle, the call of a whippoorwill, but slightly off-key. It was a signal. I replied with the same call, my breath trembling. A figure emerged from the shadows. He was a white man, dressed in the simple, rough-spun clothes of a farmer, his face etched with worry. "The Lord's star guides you," he whispered. "To the promised land," I replied, the coded response feeling heavy and real on my tongue. He was Elias Thorne, the Quaker. "We must hurry," he said, his voice urgent but kind. They won't stay in that swamp forever. He led me not through the swamp, but on a narrow, almost invisible path along its edge. The chase was on. Even with the head start, we knew Finch would eventually realize he'd been tricked. The real pursuit would begin soon. For hours we moved in a grueling half-run. My lungs burned, and a sharp pain stitched my side. The weight of my pregnancy was a constant, heavy presence. But the thought of the life inside me, the secret baby, who was my reason for everything, pushed me forward. Every step was a step toward their freedom. Just as the first hint of grey lightened the eastern sky, we heard it. The sound I had dreaded my whole life, the baying of the hounds. Finch had found my real trail. "They are close," Elias said, his face grim. "Too close." Panic, cold and sharp, threatened to overwhelm me, but then my mother's training took over. "The water," I gasped. "We need to get to the water." We scrambled toward the sound of Shiloh Creek. It was still swollen from the recent rains, a churning, muddy ribbon of water. Without a second thought, I waded in, the icy current shocking my system. Elias followed, his face a mask of determination. We moved upstream, in the water, for what felt like miles. The frigid water numbed my legs, but I knew it was our only hope, the only way to break the scent trail. We finally crawled out onto the opposite bank, shivering and exhausted, just as the sun broke over the horizon. In the distance, we could hear the confused yelps of the dogs as they lost our trail at the water's edge. We had done it. We had beaten them. But the moment of relief was short-lived. As we lay hidden in the undergrowth, two figures on horseback appeared on the bank we had just left. It was Finch and another patrolman. I could see the rage on his face, even from a distance. He screamed curses into the morning air. He had been outsmarted, defeated, publicly made a fool of. In that moment, watching him, I felt a surge of triumph so powerful it almost brought me to my knees. This was the beginning. This was the first taste of what it meant to humiliate the system he represented. I had taken myself, and I was taking the master's unborn child, his supposed millionaire. This was the ultimate act of defiance, the beginning of my impossible escape made real. Elias helped me to my feet. "His pride is wounded," he whispered. "That makes him more dangerous. We can't rest yet. The next station is still a day's journey." The great escape from Oakwood was over, but the long, perilous journey to true freedom had just begun. The journey north was a descent into a world of shadows and whispers. The Underground Railroad was not a single path, but a living, breathing network of hidden spaces and courageous souls. It was the space under the floorboards, the secret room behind a fireplace, the false bottom of a farmer's wagon. Elias Thorne led me to the first station, a small, unassuming farm owned by a free black family, the Petersons. Mrs. Peterson, a woman with kind eyes and hands as worn as my mother's, took one look at me, soaked, shivering, and visibly pregnant, and enveloped me in a hug that felt like coming home. "You are safe here, child," she said. "Rest." For 2 days, I slept in a real bed for the first time in my life. I ate hot meals. Mrs. Peterson tended to my exhaustion, giving me herbal teas that soothed the aches in my body and the fear in my heart. Her husband, a blacksmith, worked with Elias to plan the next leg of my journey. From their farm, I was passed from one conductor to the next. I traveled for a week, hidden in a wagon, buried under sacks of potatoes, the smell of damp earth filling my nostrils. The driver, a grim-faced German farmer who spoke little English, would pass food and water to me through a small hole. Every bump in the road, every time the wagon stopped, my heart seized with terror. Was this it? Had we been discovered? Another time, I was guided through the night by a young woman, barely older than myself, who navigated the dense forests of Maryland as if she were walking through her own garden. She was a former slave who had escaped years earlier and now dedicated her life to guiding others. She taught me how to find edible plants and how to move without making a sound. "Freedom ain't a place you get to," she told me one night as we huddled for warmth. "It's something you gotta keep fighting for every single day." The dangers were constant. Slave catchers and their dogs were a pervasive threat. We learned to spot their patrols, to read the notices they posted in towns offering rewards for runaways. One evening, hiding in a barn, we heard them ride past, their coarse laughter and talk of the money they'd make drifting through the wooden slats. I held my breath, pressing myself against the hay, praying the secret babyos inside me wouldn't choose that moment to kick. The dark impossible escape was a minute-by-minute battle for survival, but there were also moments of breathtaking beauty. The first time I crossed the Mason-Dixon line, the symbolic border between slavery and freedom, I wept. It was just an imaginary line on a map, but crossing it felt like shedding a skin. I saw black men and women walking the streets of a town in Pennsylvania, not owned by anyone, moving with a purpose and a dignity I had never been allowed. It was a vision of the future I was fighting for. Weeks turned into a month. The journey was taking its toll on my body. The time for the baby to arrive was drawing near. My final conductor, a stern Quaker woman named Patience, saw my condition and made a decision. "You can't travel further like this," she declared. "The risk is too great." She brought me to a small, tight-knit community of abolitionists and free blacks on the outskirts of Philadelphia. It was here, in a small, clean room in the attic of a safe house, that I gave birth. With Mrs. Peterson's words in my ear, and the help of 2 other women who had made this same journey, my child came into the world. It was a boy. As I held him in my arms, this tiny, perfect being, the world fell away. He was not a slave. He was born free. He would never know the sting of the lash, the shame of the auction block, the terror of the master's gaze. I looked at his face, and I saw my mother's eyes. I saw Samuel's determination. I saw the hopes of a generation. The man who fathered him, Master Caldwell, had been humiliated in the most profound way. His power, his name, his bloodline, it meant nothing here. He had intended this child to be another piece of property, another asset. Instead, I had stolen him away and given him the one thing money could never buy: freedom. This child was the true millionaire. He was the inheritor not of a plantation built on suffering, but of a legacy of resistance and a future of infinite possibility. As I held my freeborn son, I knew the journey had been worth every terrifying step. Freedom was not the paradise I had imagined. It was cold, it was loud, and it was complicated. In Philadelphia, I was no longer someone's property, but I was not yet truly free. The shadow of slavery was long, and the poison of racism seeped into the North as well. There were jobs I couldn't get, places I couldn't go, people who looked at me and my son with suspicion and contempt. The Fugitive Slave Act meant that even here I was not completely safe. Slave catchers still roamed, and the price on my head was a constant, low-grade fear. But here I also found a community unlike any I had ever known. I found the Philadelphia Vigilance Committee, a group of black and white abolitionists, led by men like William Still. They gave me shelter, helped me find work as a laundress and a healer, and most importantly, they listened to my story. For the first time, I told it all. The songs, my mother's teachings, Samuel's lessons, the escape, the birth of my son. William Still wrote it all down in his great book, a record of the lives of those who had escaped. My story, once a secret whispered in the dark, became a testimony. It became a weapon in the fight against slavery. I named my son Samuel in honor of the old man who had opened the world of letters to me. He was my anchor and my purpose. As he grew, I taught him everything. I taught him the stories of his grandmother, Mama Rose. I taught him the names of the stars. And I taught him to read and write, not in a dusty stable, but in the bright light of our small, clean room. He would have the education I had to steal. My life found a new purpose. My own impossible escape was complete, but the railroad was still running. There were still thousands left behind. I couldn't go south again. It was too dangerous for me and for my son. But I could be a station myself. My small home became a safe house for fugitives arriving in the city. I used my healing skills to tend to their wounds, their sicknesses, their weary souls. I saw the same fire in their eyes that I once had in my own. I gave them food, shelter, and a story of hope. My story. I told them that freedom was real, that it was possible. Years passed. Samuel grew into a bright, strong young man. He was everything I had dreamed of, educated, proud, and free. He was the living embodiment of my resistance, the ultimate refutation of Master Caldwell's world. My child, the secret baby, conceived in violence and terror, was now a testament to survival. He was the heir millionaire of a legacy of courage, a fortune that could never be counted in dollars. My act of running away had not just freed myself, it had created a new lineage, a free lineage. This was how I truly humiliate my former master, not with violence, but with life, with a future he could never control. My story is just one of thousands. It is the story of the resilience of the human spirit, of the quiet, daily acts of resistance, and the burning, unquenchable desire to be free. It is a story that was almost lost, buried under the weight of history. Now, I pass it on to you. The fight for true freedom, for justice and equality is never over. It is a journey we are all on in one way or another. Look into your own history. Find the stories of resistance in your own family, in your own community. These stories are your inheritance. They are your strength. Share them. Keep them alive. Because in these stories, we find the map to a better world. This is our true story of resistance.